First Timothy chapter 4, verse 3 says that we shouldn't command people to abstain from eating meats. I conveniently overlooked that verse during my over half a year of being a vegan. Now, I want to explain how I fell into veganism because it was not intentional. You see, I was experiencing the symptoms of prediabetes, and diabetes runs in my family. And so I took extreme precautions with what I ate once I started realizing I had symptoms that were associated with having high blood sugar. Now, a few years ago, I actually cut out fruit for was it a month? Because I noticed I was having the symptoms of having high blood sugar. So I've been known to do extreme things, make extreme changes in my diet if I feel as though I am headed towards becoming diabetic. So I'll say starting in September of last year, I started noticing symptoms that I attributed to being pre-diabetic or having high elevated blood sugar levels. And I tried, different things in order to get it down, but I just couldn't keep it down for a long period of time. It seemed like it would things just didn't seem to be working. So this year, I had started, I completely cut out fruit for a couple of days just to try to get it down. And then I realized that, or I came to the conclusion that the high saturated fat was causing insulin resistance or, affecting my insulin sensitivity. And so I cut out meat, and then also I was feeling like I attributed like a depression, whenever I would consume meat. And so I just cut out meat and I figured, this will help me regain my insulin sensitivity and also will cut back on my depression or the feeling of being, down after consuming meat. But the problem was not that I was consuming meat. And I didn't realize that until I started back consuming meat 5 days ago, actually. The problem wasn't that I was consuming meat. It was that the balance of what I was eating was off. Like I would make a whole pan of chopped carrots as a meal, like uh, with the processed oils or whatever. And so that would, of course, raise my blood sugar. See, I didn't realize that until, I started making these changes and looking at the glycemic index. But I would eat entire meals of one thing, and they were the healthy foods. But of course, if you have a sugar problem and you're consuming cooked carrots or you're consuming bowls of apples, then that's still sugar. So my problem was the extremes in what I was eating. And instead of dealing with that, I just started cutting out certain foods. So, um, I went to consuming one fruit a day and cut out animal products entirely. Now, they say that you experience something that's a honeymoon phase or something at the beginning of veganism. And see, I didn't realize I was a vegan until later on because I was just cutting out the foods that I thought were going to lead me to becoming a diabetic. But, I felt like, I wasn't stopped up anymore. I just felt, I didn't feel the depression anymore. And I consider that my honeymoon phase. But as the months went on, I noticed some symptoms that I could ignore. Like, first of all, my diet was very boring because it consisted mostly of vegetables and, peanuts. And it became very boring, first and foremost. And also, a few months ago, I actually was daydreaming in front of my pot of soup that I would cook every day of just vegetables. Um, I started daydreaming, and the okra in the soup actually became red meat cooking in the soup. I was daydreaming about red meat being in the soup, replacing the okra, or the okra turned to red meat. And so I was just like, oh, that's curious. But then um, as my pride started to compensate for my boring diet, because I didn't like my diet, because I had cut out so many different foods, cut out meat entirely. um, my diet was boring, and so I feel like I compensated with the pride of being able to restrict my diet and be a vegan, because it takes discipline to cut out those food groups, and not consume any animal products. It does take discipline. So I started to develop a little bit of pride, and so it started. Um, it started innocently enough, but towards the end, I was professing that I was a vegan and happy about it, and I'm glad that God took me down, so that took me down a notch or so in terms of giving me persistent symptoms that let me know that it wasn't working. But anyway, so I felt, instead of reacting to that, seeing my body's intelligence in showing me that I needed red meat, I said, oh, I am so disciplined for not going with that daydream and, succumbing to the temptation of eating meat. I'm just so disciplined, for not listening to my body. Now, um, after on Thanksgiving was the first day that I said openly to a relative that I was vegan. And I said I was vegan because I have diabetes in my family. This was not a blood relative, but a relative through marriage. I just professed it. I'm vegan because I have diabetes in my family. Like proud of being vegan. And I was, I recently just come to the realization I'm a vegan. This is a group that I'm a part of, and it takes all this discipline, and um, so shortly thereafter, like as soon as I got home, like I'll say no more than 2 days later, I developed a pain in my head, and it felt like a blockage, like something was being blocked. And I felt for a week, an entire week, that I was going to have an aneurysm, because I was like, I've never had one, but I'm like, this must be what an aneurysm feels like, because I just felt like there was a blockage and it was hurting. And I I just felt like, I'm gonna die, like I'm gonna have an aneurysm. Now it went away, and I didn't quite know what to attribute it to. I was like, well, maybe it's because, I ate out on Thanksgiving, and I don't eat out. I cook everything. So, but I was with family on that day, so I ate out. It's like, well, maybe it was that, or maybe it was because I was painting, and I still don't know quite what it was, or maybe it was, I didn't know. But I also developed lower back pain that wouldn't go away um, towards the end of my veganism. And after I'll say a month of just kind of this lower back pain that I would experience um, from time to time, I realized that, it might be because my muscles aren't getting what they need in order to repair properly. And so, I just realized, and it was the lower back pain that eventually, because that was the thing that wouldn't go away. And plus, on my non-animal product diet, I had recently gotten the idea to do stir fries instead of soups, and I had incorporated avocado in my stir fry, and that was the favorite, my favorite part of the stir fry was the avocado. Now, the first few days I was okay, but like by the third or fourth day of consuming avocado, I realized I had a strong intolerance for it, and my appetite went away for 2 days. I had stomach pains. It was a miserable feeling. And I'm like, that along with the back pain, I'm like, something has to change. My diet is not working. It's not fulfilling. And I have this lower back pain. The honeymoon was over. And so, I had to swallow my pride and kind of, reassess my diet. And I'm the kind of person where I want to learn. Like, if I'm wrong, I want to know I'm wrong, and I want to be able to help other people. Now, with my veganism, I felt like I was pre-diabetic, and I thought, hey, this is a great diet. This is a great diet for pre-diabetics and people with diabetes, because I thought, well, I'm better off than I was before. I was comparing it to how I was before, when I was eating like the bowls full of cooked carrots, that I kept in the oven for an hour until they browned. And, in the times when I was eating bowls full of apples, or shakes made of like 4 bananas. I was eating in excess these foods that had the label of being healthy. And because I like sugar, I use these healthy sweet foods in order to deal with that, with my sweet tooth. But in excess, that was just sugar that was just my body was not able to deal with. So I felt better than I felt then. And so I figured, well, this diet is working. But I still experienced some of the symptoms of having high blood sugar, even when I was on the vegan diet. But I just felt better than I had when I was, consuming in excess, those sugary foods. So about 5 days ago, the lower back pain wasn't going away. The diet was boring, and it, the with the avocado situation, it made me sick. So, it was like 2 in the morning, and I was like, I'm not going another day like this, because I'm pretty sure I'm depleted of some kind of, vitamins or something. And I just need to go ahead and just get off of this vegan train of being, morally superior, because I'm not even eating animals, or being very disciplined. I need to get off of this high horse and see what the problem is. No lie, I went to Walmart. It was like, 2 in the morning at least. As soon I haven't been to the meat area of Walmart in over half a year. As soon as I went to that meat section, I felt a tingling in my head. Like a tingling, like my whole head tingled. It's almost like my body, my head, my brain was like happy that I was near meat. Like, that's the only way I can explain. And I haven't felt that tingle in months, but my head, my brain actually tingled when I went to the meat section of Walmart. So because I was worried about the saturated fat, I got 93% lean beef. I got flounder, and the next day I went back because I initially, when I first consumed the 93% lean beef, I felt a little depressed. And so I got some whole milk, because I was told, organic whole milk, because I was told that might help with the depression or whatever. So I went back to get the whole organic milk the day after. But I consumed, as soon as I got home, I consumed like a stir fry with the 93% lean beef. And I did feel a little bit of digestion discomfort for maybe a few minutes, for the first 3 days of consuming the red meat, because I had gone without it for over half a year. And so I felt like that was my body getting used to consuming meat again. But it was in no way a problem. It was just a little discomfort for a few minutes or so. But I kid you not, after my first serving of the red meat, after my first meal, including the red meat, I started getting ideas, and I felt like my creativity had been reactivated. Um, I got ideas in order to do things differently, in order to make things more productive, and I had the motivation to finish projects that I'd started and hadn't finished yet. And I actually started back on a project that I started a while ago and hadn't finished. And I got ideas for how to complete other projects. It's like my creativity had been turned off, but I didn't know it, because it wasn't like, I was thinking about my creativity. Like, my brain was my creativity during the time I was a vegan. So it's not like I could think up new things with the brain that I had. It's just like, this is who I am at this point in time. But after that, that's when these new thoughts and new creative ways of looking at things and ways to complete things came to me right after I had that meat meal. So that was scary, because I wouldn't have known, like, I wouldn't have known that my creativity had been stunted during the time that I was a vegan had I not reincorporated meat into my diet. And all of a sudden, my creativity is activated again. And I feel not only the creativity, but the motivation and the drive and the energy, and my energy increased as well to get it done. But while I was a vegan, I could not have even conceptualized being anything else, because I had nothing to compare it to. That's who I was. I mean, over half a year of being a vegan, that's what I was. However I was feeling was what I was, and I had nothing else to compare it to. But once I started back on the meat, my creativity was activated, my motivation and my energy. And the slight depression that I felt really only lasted that first day. I consumed milk a few days, maybe 2 or 3 days into my reintroduction of animal products. But I actually stopped, because I developed like a cyst, and it's still there, but it seems like it's getting smaller. There's a cyst right there above my collarbone, and I feel like that has to do with maybe some lactose intolerance. But I plan on consuming milk, and I've done a video about menstrual cramps and how meat and nuts make them severe, and how if you cut those out during those like 3 days or so that you experience menstrual cramps, then you won't experience the cramps, and therefore you won't have to rely on pain medicine. But I do not advise anyone to go without animal protein for those 3 or 4 days that you're having the cramps. So what I'm going to try to do is drink milk, whole organic milk, on those 3 or 4 days that I'm having the cramps, so that I'm eating some animal protein in order to continue to help my muscles recover, because cutting out protein for days or whatever is just not a good idea. So I'm going to try to drink that whole milk only on the days where I expect to experience cramping, and not every day, because like I said, I'm having some lactose intolerant symptoms, and so I don't want to overdo it on the milk. But I haven't had I haven't had I've only had positive results so far from going back on the meat. Like I said, the slight depression only lasted for that first meal, but ever since then I've been fine. My energy has increased to where I almost feel, sometimes I feel like I have too much energy, and I just have to like get up and do something, which didn't happen when I had become a vegan for that time period. But and my weight hasn't changed. You would think that you incorporate meat, if you go from eating vegetables and nuts and a fruit a day, and then you incorporate meat into your diet, I would think that I would gain weight. But see, I haven't, and I'm consuming 93% lean beef, and I'm only eating when I'm hungry. And I don't think, at this point, I'm not convinced that anything other than red meat can bring, and almonds as well. Almonds and red meat seem to bring blood sugar down really, really low. And so going without that, I think going without the red meat and the animal products, I think was why I continued to experience some symptoms of high blood sugar because I didn't have that meat to really, really bring it down. I would consume almonds, but almonds don't have, you know, they're good, but they're good for that, for bringing down your blood sugar. But I feel like red meat is something that can't be eliminated if you want to, for me, in order to keep my blood sugar low. And those symptoms have pretty much gone away when I reintroduce red meat, and I still consume the nuts. I still consume as many nuts as I did when I was vegan, but now I consume the red meat as well. And so my weight hasn't changed. My energy has increased. Um, and I wanted to do this video, and I deleted all the videos where I talked about, the vegan diet, because it would be irresponsible to keep those videos up, or any kind of diet that I find to be a mistake. So I deleted those videos, but I needed to make this video in order to explain why I deleted those other videos, because um, being a vegan did not work for me. Um, it was dangerous, and who knows what would have happened. Like I said, I felt the tingling in my brain when I went to the meat section of Walmart. Who knows if I would have starved my brain for another 6 months or so, what would have happened if I would have caused damage that, like if I would have started to kill my brain, just by this extreme diet. But it was a mistake, and I feel like it's a deception of the devil, because like I said, my creativity, and all my creativity as a Christian, all my creativity is going to be channeled towards Christianity. It's not going anywhere else. It's not. I don't. If I'm creative, I'm going to try to channel it in some way into furthering the mission of Christ, which was to bring more people to Him. So when your creativity is stunted, you don't have the motivation, and you don't have the ideas to do that. It's almost like you want to get to California and you have a car, but the car keeps breaking down because it doesn't have the right fuel. It's like you might be willing, the spirit might be willing, but the flesh is unable because it's not receiving the proper fuel. So you can't get to California on a car that isn't working at its optimal potential. So I wasn't consuming the right fuel. Therefore, I didn't have the creativity, I didn't have the drive, and I didn't have the energy in order to really work towards the goals I'd set for myself. And it wasn't until I reincorporated meat that, all of a sudden I had all this energy. But I just feel like, man, there are so many, because, towards the end, and I'm glad, because it was literally a few days after I had announced proudly that I was a vegan at this Thanksgiving thing that I had the head symptoms, and then, the back pain that wouldn't go away. And I'm glad of that. I feel like that was, my body was more intelligent than I was at that point. But I feel like God, if we're on the wrong path, He gives us these signs to let us know, and plus, I don't want to be someone who gives people wrong information and doesn't correct it. And that's why I'm correcting it now. But, um, I wouldn't have known, like, if I didn't have any symptoms, I would have, been like, oh, this diet is boring and the food is getting to be nasty. But I wouldn't have, it was the body symptoms that really let me know that this vegan diet is not working for me. So the reason why I think that it was a deception from the devil is because, also, of course, because the creativity was stunted and the motivation and the energy was stunted. But also, and then plus what 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 3 says. But also, towards the end of my veganism, and after I had stopped becoming a vegan, all of a sudden I'm having these food dreams again, which, I only have rarely, But really, like the last couple of days, I've been having them like every night where, I am being enticed to eat certain food that's bad for me, like macaroni and cheese or fried okra. Last night, I continually was going to a stand. It was like an ice cream stand or something, and I was ordering like banana pudding on a waffle cone, but I wasn't calling it banana pudding. I was calling it something else, some weird name. That and all the desserts had like a weird name that wasn't the name that you would associate with it. Like you would say vanilla ice cream, or you would say banana pudding, but like these names were names I didn't even recognize. And the only thing I can think is that I was asking for the ingredients, maybe the artificial ingredients, rather than the name, so that I would know. Even though the devil was tempting me to over and over again, trying to tempt me to incorporate banana pudding into my diet, I also had a counter information that was letting me know this isn't what this is. Like it might look like banana pudding, or it might look like vanilla ice cream or whatever, but it's really these artificial flavors. I don't know. That's the only thing I can associate with it or attribute to why I would have to name them something other than what they were in order to let the person at the counter know what I wanted. And there were names that I didn't recognize. But so all these after I'm no longer a vegan, so I'm no longer under that spell, that spell of weakening my body and my mind. My body and my mind were being weakened. I had the lower back pain, and I had no creativity or drive or motivation. um After that, I think Satan went into full gear in trying to get me to, well, at least consume like junk food, which would be wrong fuel for my body. And I don't want people to underestimate both the subtle power of deception, like through flattery. And I've done videos on this before, like, oh, you're this great person because you're not eating animals and you have such discipline. And, other people, if they just did what you did, they wouldn't have diabetes and stuff like that. It was pride. And also I convinced myself that I was helping people. But over time, after the honeymoon phase and all that, I realized that this diet is not helping my body recover, and it's weakening me. But there are just subtle ways in which you can get caught in diets that are actually destroying your body, and therefore making your spirit less effective in this world, because your body isn't able to work with your spirit. So, I just wanted to make this video to let you know that veganism can be dangerous to the body. Not consuming meats can be dangerous. It was dangerous for me. And I've listed the symptoms that I experienced. And I'm just thankful that God let me know in time that I was missing something that I needed to, reincorporate in moderation back into my diet. But the subtleties of the devil, and it's just a video that I felt as though I needed to make. And I genuinely apologize for the 3 videos that I had made about my, exciting, new diet that had cured my prediabetes, because it was premature. And after the honeymoon phase ended, I realized that the vegan diet was very wrong for me.